The Wellington Country Club sprawled beneath the Georgia sun like a polished jewel, its pool deck alive with the hum of summer. Imani reclined in a lounge chair, the striped umbrella casting a cool shadow over her dark skin. Her best friend Maddie splashed in the shallow end, her carefree laugh cutting through the chatter of families enjoying their afternoon. The air smelled of sunscreen and chlorine, a perfect day unfolding, until it wasn't. The trouble crept in quietly at first, a subtle shift in the breeze. A woman approached, her heels clicking with deliberate precision against the concrete. She wore a crisp white sundress that screamed privilege, her hair swept into a tight bun, her lips pressed into a thin, judgmental line. Mrs. Judith Lancaster. Imani didn't know her name yet, but she recognized the archetype instantly. She'd seen it too many times. The assessing stare, the slight lift of the chin, the unspoken declaration of authority. Maddie climbed out of the pool, water dripping from her swimsuit, and grinned. Imani, you're missing out. This water's perfect. But before Imani could reply, Mrs. Lancaster stopped a few feet away, her shadow stretching over them like a storm cloud rolling in. The lazy splash of water faded, the distant chatter dimmed, and an uneasy silence settled in its place. I'm sorry, Mrs. Lancaster said, her voice clipped and laced with a saccharine edge, but I don't recall seeing your name on the guest list, sweetheart. Her eyes locked onto Imani, narrowing just enough to make it clear. This wasn't a casual inquiry. It was a gauntlet thrown down. Imani met her gaze, steady and unflinching. She'd danced this dance before, on crowded buses, in corner stores, at school assemblies. The script was predictable. Tight lips, a quick once-over, and a demand to justify her presence. Her jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level. I was signed improperly. Maddie's mom added me as her guest. Maddie stepped forward, her tone sharp. Mrs. Lancaster, my mom handles it online. You can check with the front desk if you don't believe us. Judith Lancaster barely flicked her eyes toward Maddie, her focus pinned on Imani. Rules are rules, sweetheart, she said, the word dripping with condescension. We have policies for a reason. It keeps things organized. She let out a breathy, amused huff, shaking her head as if Imani were a child who couldn't grasp the concept. Organized, Maddie scoffed, her face flushing red. This is ridiculous. My mom. It's fine. Imani cut in, her voice calm but edged with steel. She wasn't about to grovel for permission to exist where she'd been invited. She reached for her bag, ready to march straight to the front desk and shut this down herself. But as she stood, she caught it. A low murmur from a couple lounging nearby, their eyes darting between her and Mrs. Lancaster. The lifeguard shifted awkwardly on his perch, pretending to scan the pool. A dozen pairs of eyes lingered, waiting, watching. Imani knew this moment like the back of her hand. It wasn't about a name on a list. It was about power, about making her feel out of place, pushing her to second-guess herself and slink away. And for that reason alone, she refused. She straightened, locking eyes with Mrs. Lancaster. You can check with the front desk. I'm not going anywhere. A heavy pause hung in the air, thick with unspoken tension. Maddie grabbed Imani's hand, huffing, Come on, I'm so over this, and tugged her toward the cabana. They walked away, shoulders squared, heads high, but the weight of those stairs followed them like a spotlight tracking a fugitive. Imani's gut twisted. She could feel it in her bones. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Under the cabana's shade, Maddie flopped into a lounge chair, arms crossed, her foot tapping a furious beat against the concrete. I cannot believe her. Who even is she? She's not management. She doesn't run this place. Imani exhaled slowly, rolling her shoulders to shake off the tension coiling in her muscles. She's just another woman who thinks she gets to decide who belongs and who doesn't. Maddie sat up, her eyes flashing with indignation. That's so messed up. She literally saw me sign you in. What's her problem? It's whatever, Imani said, but the words tasted bitter. It wasn't whatever. The stairs still hovered at the edge of her vision, some subtle, others blatant. She could feel them, a silent jury waiting to see how this played out. She was about to suggest hitting the snack bar to shake it off when a voice boomed across the pool deck, shattering the fragile calm. I told you. She needs to leave. Imani's head snapped up. Mrs. Lancaster was back, and this time, She'd brought reinforcements. A tall, wiry man in a navy polo stood beside her, his club name tag gleaming under the sun. Security. Maddie shot to her feet, her voice rising. Are you serious right now? Mrs. Lancaster's smile was tight, triumphant, a predator closing in on its prey. If there was a miscommunication, I apologize, she said, her tone dripping with sugary politeness that didn't match the glint in her eyes. But non-members can't use the pool. It's a simple policy. The security officer hesitated, his eyes flicking between Maddie and Imani, clearly uneasy. Imani stood slowly, keeping her hands loose at her sides, her expression a mask of neutrality. She wouldn't give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. I already told you, I'm a guest. Maddie's family signed me in. You can check with my mom. Maddie snapped, stepping forward. This is insane. The officer shifted his weight, visibly uncomfortable. Miss, if there's been a mistake. There's no mistake, Maddie cut in, her voice cracking with frustration. Why don't you check the system instead of just taking her word for it? Mrs. Lancaster pursed her lips, her composure faltering for a split second. But before she could fire back, a deep voice sliced through the tension like a guillotine. I think that's a great idea. Everything stopped. The security guard straightened, his shoulders stiffening. A hush swallowed the pool deck, conversations dying mid-sentence, forks clattering onto plates. Imani turned, her chest tightening as if the air itself had thickened. Standing just beyond the lounge chairs, hands casually tucked into his pockets, was Everett Carter, her father, the governor of Georgia. His name was etched into the donor wall at the club's entrance, a quiet monument to his influence. And from the way Mrs. Lancaster's face drained of color, she knew exactly who he was. The tension swelled, heavy enough to smother the entire pool deck. Everett wasn't an intimidating figure by nature. No bluster, no barking orders like some caricature of a politician. But he carried a quiet authority that filled the space around him, a gravitational pull that demanded attention without effort. His polished shoes tapped softly against the stone pavement as he stepped forward, his gaze flicking to Imani first, checking on her, always checking, before settling on Mrs. Lancaster with the calm precision of a predator sizing up its mark. I'm sorry, he said, his voice smooth and measured. I don't believe we've met. You are. Mrs. Lancaster swallowed hard, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came. The security officer took a cautious step back, sensing the shift in the wind. Everett's eyes didn't waver, cool and unyielding. You seem very concerned about my daughter's presence here. I'd love to know why. I was just ensuring the club's policies were being followed, Governor Carter, she stammered, her earlier bravado crumbling like dry sand. He nodded slowly, almost thoughtfully. That's fair. I'd expect nothing less. But tell me, did you personally check the guest list before asking my daughter to leave? Silence crashed over them. Imani watched Mrs. Lancaster's face twist, her mind racing for an answer that wouldn't come. Everett turned to the security guard, his tone unchanged. Did you check the guest list before getting involved? The man hesitated, then shook his head, his voice barely above a mutter. I was just following up on a complaint. I see, Everett said, letting the words hang like a noose. So an accusation was enough to call security on a teenage girl. Mrs. Lancaster let out a nervous laugh, waving a hand as if to dismiss the weight of the moment. Governor, this is just a misunderstanding. Is it? Everett tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing just enough to pin her in place. Maddie, who'd been simmering beside Imani, finally erupted. That's a lie. You watch me sign her in. Everett let the silence stretch, a deliberate pause that sucked the air from the scene. Then he exhaled, his voice low and unreadable. This club prides itself on being exclusive, doesn't it? But I'd hate to think exclusion and discrimination are being confused for policy. Mrs. Lancaster's eyes widened, panic flickering across her face like a cornered animal. Governor, that's not what this is. He raised a hand, cutting her off with a polite but firm gesture that brooked no argument. I'm not interested in excuses. Imani was invited here, signed in properly, and has been nothing but respectful. Yet somehow, she was the only one singled out. The pool deck was a graveyard of sound. Even the lifeguards abandoned their pretense of duty, their whistles dangling uselessly. Mrs. Lancaster's face flushed a deep crimson, her fingers twitching at her sides, as if itching to claw back control. It won't happen again, she managed, her voice small. Everett held her gaze for a beat longer, then offered a tight, controlled smile. I know it won't. With a small nod to the security officer, who looked like he'd rather sink into the earth, he turned to Imani, his tone softening. You good, sweetheart? Imani exhaled, the knot in her chest loosening just a fraction. Yeah, Dad. I'm good. He nodded once, decisive. All right then. Let's enjoy the rest of the day. He gave Mrs. Lancaster one final glance, a look that carried the weight of a warning, before strolling to an empty chair and sitting down as if nothing had happened. But Imani knew better. Everything had changed. The pool deck remained frozen, a tableau of uncertainty as Mrs. Lancaster stood there, her carefully constructed facade cracking at the edges. Her fingers twitched, as if she wanted to smooth her already impeccable dress, to erase the last 5 minutes. But there was no undoing this. She'd lost the reins, and she knew it. With nothing left to say, she turned sharply on her heel and marched away, her sandals clicking a hasty retreat across the pavement. The security officer lingered for a moment, muttering an awkward, "Enjoy your day," before scurrying after her like a scolded dog. Maddie let out a low whistle, collapsing back into her chair. Well, that was satisfying. Imani didn't respond right away. She was still processing, her mind replaying the confrontation in slow motion. Her father had stepped in, flipped the script, and sent Mrs. Lancaster packing. Victory, right? But the sting lingered, the fact that it had happened at all, that she'd had to prove she belonged somewhere she was invited. That weight sat heavy in her chest, a stone she couldn't shake loose. Everett leaned back in his chair, pulling out his phone with the casual air of a man who hadn't just dismantled someone's authority in front of a crowd. But he wasn't scrolling. His eyes stayed on Imani, waiting, reading her silence. She finally sank into her seat, exhaling. This kind of thing happens a lot, doesn't it? He set his phone down, his gaze steady. More than you know. Maddie frowned, crossing her arms. I just don't get it. My parents have guests all the time. Nobody says a word. Ever. Everett nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Because no one expects them to be here. He turned to Imani, his voice softening but firm. You weren't doing anything wrong, but you were visible. And for some people, that's enough to make them uncomfortable. The words landed like a punch. Imani stared at the water, sunlight bouncing off the surface in dazzling shards. You knew something like this would happen, didn't you? He rubbed his jaw, a shadow crossing his face. I hoped it wouldn't, but I wasn't surprised when it did. Maddie shifted in her seat, guilt etching lines into her expression. I'm sorry, she said, her voice small. I should have called my mom the second it started. I could have ended it sooner. Everett shook his head. It's not just about stopping it, Maddie. It's about seeing it for what it is. What do you mean? She asked, leaning forward. His gaze was unflinching. A lot of people don't recognize what's happening right in front of them until it's too obvious to ignore. That's why so many just watched. They didn't want to get involved. They didn't think it was their problem. Imani exhaled, her breath shaky. But it was. Her father's smile was small, knowing. It always is. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was warm, thick with the hum of laughter and splashing from people who'd already moved on, oblivious to the storm that had just passed. Imani's mind churned, replaying Mrs. Lancaster's smug smile, the security guard's hesitation, the crowd's silence. Then, a memory flickered, a day 2 years back, a different pool, a different woman with the same tight-lipped stare. That time, no one had stepped in. She'd left, head down, the sting of exclusion burning in her throat. Today was different. Today she'd won. But why did it still feel like a fight? Maddie broke the silence, perking up. Okay, enough of this. Imani, you have to try the club's fries. They're legendary. Imani managed a soft laugh, the tension in her chest easing just a little. All right. Let's go. They headed to the snack bar, the sun dipping lower, casting long shadows across the deck. Maddie chattered about some ridiculous plan involving a cannonball contest, but Imani's mind stayed half-anchored in the moment by the pool. Everett joined them, his presence a quiet anchor as they ordered fries and milkshakes. The day rolled on, the confrontation fading into the background, but it wasn't forgotten. By the time they finished eating, The sun had started its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Sitting at a picnic table near the pool, Imani swirled her lemonade with her straw, watching the ice spin in lazy circles. Maddie was mid-rant about something trivial, but Imani wasn't listening. Everett noticed, his voice cutting through her thoughts. Still thinking about it. She glanced up, caught off guard. Yeah. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. What part? She sighed, the words spilling out before she could stop them. All of it. The way she looked at me like I didn't belong, no matter what I said. The way she doubled down even after Maddie told her I was a guest. It didn't matter. She'd already decided I was in the wrong. Everett nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. That's how people like her keep their power. They don't ask questions, they make statements. They don't need proof, just enough people to go along with it. Imani thought back to the crowd, the way they'd watched but said nothing, the way security had stepped in without a shred of evidence. He was right. It wasn't just Mrs. Lancaster. It was the system that let her thrive. Maddie, who'd been quiet, finally spoke up. I should have done more. I could have called my mom right then and there. Everett shook his head again. It's not on you to fix it, Maddie. It's on them to see it. The realization settled over Imani like a shroud. She hadn't just been defending her right to be there. She'd been exposing something bigger, something uglier. And then, a twist hit her like a freight train. She turned to her father, her voice low. You've dealt with her before, haven't you? Everett's eyes flickered, a rare crack in his calm. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. Not her specifically, but her type? More times than I can count. Maddie's jaw dropped. Wait, what? Spill. He hesitated, then gave a small shrug. Last year, at a fundraiser here, a woman, different name, same attitude, tried to have a staff member removed. Claimed he didn't look like he belonged serving drinks. Turned out he'd been with the club for a decade. I had to step in then, too. Imani's stomach churned. And nobody said anything? Not a word, he said. Until I did. The table fell silent again, the weight of his words sinking in. Maddie stared at her milkshake, then looked at Imani. I hate that you have to deal with this. Imani met her eyes, her voice steady. I hate it too. But there was no point in pretending. This wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Still, today was different. Today, Mrs. Lancaster had been forced to face what she'd done, really face it, in front of everyone. And all those silent onlookers? They'd seen it too. That mattered, even if it didn't rewrite the world overnight. Everett stretched, breaking the heavy silence. Now, are we going to keep talking about this woman, or are we going to enjoy our day? Maddie grinned, bouncing back instantly. Fries and milkshakes again next weekend? Imani chuckled, the knot in her chest loosening further. You're ridiculous. Everett shook his head, amused. I'll let you two plan that. I've got a state to run. He stood, smoothing his shirt, and headed toward the parking lot. Imani watched him go, her mind still turning over the day. Mrs. Lancaster had wanted her to feel small, but she didn't. She wasn't just invited, she belonged. And no one was going to make her forget that. But then, as they packed up to leave, Maddie froze, her eyes widening. Imani. What? Imani followed her gaze. Across the pool deck, near the snack bar, Mrs. Lancaster stood with a small group, her voice carrying just enough to catch fragments. File a complaint. Unacceptable. Imani's blood ran cold. Maddie whispered, She's not letting this go, is she? Before Imani could answer, Everett's voice called from the parking lot. Girls, let's go. They grabbed their bags and hurried after him, but Imani's steps slowed as she glanced back. Mrs. Lancaster's eyes met hers across the distance, a glint of defiance still burning there. This wasn't over. Not yet. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the Wellington Country Club bathed in twilight. Imani stood by the pool's edge, the water still and silent now, reflecting the first stars. Mrs. Lancaster had wanted her to shrink, to doubt her place. But she hadn't. She'd stood tall, not because her father's title backed her up, but because she refused to let anyone strip away what was hers. Belonging isn't a privilege someone grants you. It's a right you claim, a line you draw in the sand. This isn't a neat little story where the villain repents and the crowd cheers. People like Mrs. Lancaster don't disappear. They regroup, they whisper, they wait. But every time you hold your ground, you chip away at their power. You make it harder for them to target the next person. And that's not nothing. That's everything. So here's your wake-up call. Next time you see someone questioned, challenged, or pushed out of a space they belong in, don't just stand there. Say something. Silence isn't neutral. It's a vote for the status quo. Because justice doesn't win by accident. It wins when we fight for it, one moment at a time. Now, let's flip the script. Think Mrs. Lancaster was just a stickler for rules? Drop a comment and try to change my mind. I'll wait. If this hit you hard, smash that like button. It's free therapy. And subscribe, because if you don't, you'll be the one crying when you miss the next twist. Tell us, what would you have done by that pool? Hit us up below, and let's keep this fire burning. See you in the next one.